All right. We are live. Nobody's here yet. That's okay. All right. So I'll give a couple of minutes for people to trickle in here. But yeah, just wanted to hop on here for a little while with you guys. I know that it's been a minute since I released a proper video, but that is coming in the next few days or so. I'm also pushed this back an hour from how I originally wanted to. No, hold on. Hello. All right, is that picking me up better? There we go. Okay, good. Just had to turn the gain up a little bit, and here we are. Okay, so back to what I was saying a second ago. I bumped this stream back an hour from where it was initially going to be at 7 Eastern. That was candidly so I could go play Frisbee. And I brought that up because I just want to encourage everyone to. So, let me back up a little bit here. As much as I enjoy coming on here and talking to you guys, it is a little nerve-wracking. So one of the ways that I deal with stress and deal with nerves and things like that is by moving my body. And my brain works a little bit differently than most people's do. So I have to kind of make different choices to accommodate that. And one of the things that I really enjoy doing is playing sports. And so I had an opportunity to go play some Frisbee with some friends. And so I did it. And that was a good choice because here I am, a nice and balanced boy, talking with some of my friends on the internet. So as people are trickling in here, I do want to remind you that as long as we're here together, you can ask questions. That chat is open. You can ask whatever you would like at any time, and I will answer it as best as I can. Can't guarantee that I will be able to answer everything, but can everybody hear me? How's the audio sound? Because I can't, I don't have headphones in or anything, so I can't hear you. Or I can't hear myself. Good, bad? Sounds good. Thank you, Stanley. But yeah, a couple of things to go over, things that I enjoyed from this weekend. First of all, Coco Gauff winning the U.S. Open. First American woman since 2020 to win a Grand Slam event, which is pretty neat. Kind of waiting for her to break through and become the next big thing. And this is a big step in that direction, obviously. It would have been really cool to have Ben Shelton also make a final, but he did not, regrettably. I've been watching a lot of tennis lately. I don't, I got to admit, I don't watch a ton during the season, but especially around Grand Slam time, I do pay a lot more attention to it. And there was just some good stuff this weekend. I got to watch a little bit of the final, Djokovic-Medvedev, which just ended. Obviously, because those, Joker, one of the best players of all time. Yeah, I don't love the way that he or Medvedev play. It's a little attritional and kind of boring. And I like players in all sports who kind of play aggressive and get on the attack. But yeah, good job to Coco Gauff. Huge deal. Love it when Americans do really well in big international events like that, especially if it's our Open, which the U.S. Open is. Again, and even though Ben Shelton didn't end up winning or even making the final, it was cool to have him in the semis as well. I also wanted to mention our men's national team in soccer played Uzbekistan. I think that was last night, 2 nights ago. But I obviously watched that because I can't help myself. It was last night. Remember, because it was sort of our a pregame event for Alabama playing Texas, which didn't go well, and we're not going to talk about that. But yeah, in our lineup against Uzbekistan had not one but two players from Birmingham, Alabama, and Tanner Tessman, and then Chris Richards. Richards has been a part of the national team setup for a little bit longer. Center back. Tanner Tessman is like a defensive holding midfielder. But they're both from Birmingham, which is where I'm from, which is pretty neat. Of all the places in the United States to have like multiple national team players, you probably wouldn't expect it to be Birmingham, Alabama, but it is. So that just made me proud to see, very happy. And they both played well and we won. So neat. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was Hansi Flick. So Hansi Flick, up until very recently, was the manager of the German national team. National soccer team, national football team. He is the first manager in the history of that national team setup to ever be fired. And I think the thing I looked at said that they've had that team officially since 1926. And so for nearly 100 years, they've never had anybody fired until today. They got absolutely smacked by Japan over the weekend, which apparently didn't go down super well. They also had a pretty disappointing World Cup in Qatar. So, this was something that a lot of people had speculated might happen. But I thought that was kind of wild that this is a position that's existed for nearly 100 years, and this is the first time that that's ever happened. So RIP to Hans-Dieter Flick as the manager of the German national team. Speaking of national teams and people losing their jobs, Luis Rubiales, I haven't talked about this on the channel or on Twitter or anything really, just because it's kind of a hornet's nest and I don't feel super qualified wading into those waters, but I do have feelings about it, obviously, because I think most people do. Luis Rubiales, who was the president of the Spanish FA, the Spain's women's team just won the World Cup, and in the sort of like post-match fervor, Luis Rubiales kissed one of his players on the mouth. Jenny Hermoso was like one of the best players in Spain, one of the best players in the world, but kissed her on the mouth, and was confused by why people were upset about that. And that was just kind of kicked off this firestorm of controversy that's been going on the last couple of weeks, really, since that tournament ended. That was a thing, and then refused to resign. Like at this big Spanish Federation meeting, a bunch of people were there. He had this whole like speech where he got up and literally pounded the table and said "No voy a dimitir," which means I'm not going to resign, over and over again. And today he resigned. So amazing how much public pressure and lots of people wanting you to lose your job can affect your job status. So those are kind of my thoughts from the weekend. I do want to update you guys on what I'm with like my setup here. So I'm in my office, which is where most of the magic happens as far as the channel goes. Do a lot of editing in here, a lot of brainstorming. But I've got my other computer right here, which has the Sunday Night Football pregame show on. And then I'm also playing video games while we did this. Again, going back to the whole thing about giving my brain what it needs to perform well. Part of that is stimulation in the form of playing video games frequently when I'm doing things like studying, preparing for a class, things like that. So I'm playing NCAA 14, which is a fantastic game. And, it's 10 years old now. It still holds up. Still really great. Love playing it. Going back to our discussion of channel stuff, I do have a video coming out in the next few days. So that's, I mentioned in an announcement a couple of days ago that our semester just started. I'm a teacher. I teach at a community college here in town, in Greenville, which is where I live. And that's just, if you're a teacher, if you've been in education, that's just like a lot, especially at the beginning of a semester. So just had to, give that priority for the last few days or so, and still doing stuff, still like doing research, still watching videos, listening to podcasts, putting a script together. But I also have a really interesting interview subject, which will be tomorrow. And then I'll have the next few days to, edit that content all together into something coherent, which I think you guys are really going to like. So, I'm excited. I won't tell you what it's about, but that's a thing that I'm very excited about. And I'm sort of gravitating towards the mindset of, even if it takes a little bit longer, just make sure you produce good content, because that's really the standard I feel like I've set over the last nearly 2 years now, and hopefully that's what you guys expect and like about this channel. But yeah, for now, I want to give you guys a minute to open things up for questions if you want to ask them. I'm pretty much set here for the next probably 45 minutes or so. But yeah, go nuts. And I'll keep talking in the intervening time. So I'm not just going to have silence here. But yes, this is y'all's time to ask questions. I do have my Braves shirt on. What do I do for work outside of YouTube? So I am a psychology teacher. That's where my educational background comes from. I got a master's degree in 2020 from West Alabama, which is in a little town called Livingston, which is out in West Alabama, as the name would suggest. And then I got my first teaching job at the college I work at now in 2021. So a few months after that. So I teach 4 or 5 classes per semester. A lot of them are in high schools, so they're like early college classes. And so I'm kind of jetting all over the place in the Greenville area pretty much every day. I'm going from school to school, teaching mostly introductory psychology classes. But one of my favorite parts about that job is how much crossover there is with stuff I do on YouTube. So I'll get ideas pretty regularly from lectures that I give, topics that we're covering in class, and I'll be like, that kind of sounds like this thing over here. So we'll talk about like, your frontal lobe and all of the different parts of your brain that it contains, all of the different like attitudes, behaviors. It's mostly with like higher order thought processes and personality and things like that. And then, I'll connect it to something like confidence. And that's like one of the first videos I ever made was about Joe Burrow, who kind of stunk today, but he's still very rich man now, and very interesting guy. Connected to, like something that I saw in the things that I'm interested in, which is predominantly sports, and so that's where a lot of my video ideas come from. And that's something I try and incorporate with my kids too. So like my students have topics that they're interested in. I've always found school to be the most effective when you're linking the material in class to stuff that you actually care about, because not everybody cares about Sigmund Freud for Sigmund Freud's sake, and I get that. I don't. So like I'm always trying to get my students to kind of frame the stuff that we think about in class in relation to the things that they care about outside of class, because that's why they're going to get the most out of it. We do a lot of like writing and papers, and that's also going to be a lot more interesting for me to read their stuff if they're doing work that pertains to things that they already have a good knowledge base about, and that they already spend a good amount of time thinking about outside of class. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer for what I do for work outside of YouTube. Also do some contract podcast and YouTube video editing from time to time if I'm feeling up to it, just for a little extra cash here and there. Okay, Stanley Appleton asks, thoughts of the Noah Lyles comment about world champions. So if you don't know what this is, Noah Lyles, who is a sprinter, yeah, I'm going to Google that BS. I'm pretty sure he's a runner. Noah Lyles. Oh, thank you. Yeah, Google says athlete. Yes, I already knew that. Professional track and field sprinter competing in the 100 and 200 meters. So yeah, he's one of the fastest men in the world. So he went on this, like, I think it was in a press conference, had this little like diatribe about how triggered he gets when people in other sports are like, we're world champions. And I actually had a conversation about this today. Because, he is an international athlete. He's been to the Olympics. Like, if he wins a race at the Olympics, he is the world champion. If he wins a race at world championships, he is the world champion. Because he's, running against people from other countries inherently. And I could see how that would get a little annoying. famously, I think George Steinbrenner is the old Yankees owner, like even made a comment about this like years and years ago, how like in America, we tend to proclaim our teams champions of the world, even though they're really just the champion of like the American League. And that annoys some people sometimes, and I get that. But I think it varies from sport to sport. So like when we talk about like baseball, like the American League is the best league in the world. Like Japan also quite good, but baseball, the demographics on like the actual makeup of the league is very international. I think there's more of an argument to be made with something like football, our version of football, where like almost everybody in the entire league is American. All the teams are American. Like this is not something that is like truly international in quite the same way. I know that there are leagues out there. Like I remember Art Briles like popping up. I think he was like a coach in the Italian football league, which was kind of nuts. Sort of a really terrible version of Ted Lasso. But yeah, that was a thing that happened. But yeah, that just like I said, I think that varies from sport to sport. It's really hard to get like true international champions for things. So like even in global football, even in soccer, like they have like the Club World Cup, obviously aside from the regular World Cup where there are national teams competing against each other, but like the Club World Cup is like a less prestigious tournament than the Champions League, even though technically the Champions League is just UEFA, it's just Europe, and then eventually Saudi Arabia when they pay enough money to get in there. So yeah, while I understand where he's coming from, I don't. There's sort of an inherent limit on that in a lot of ways. Yeah, I just like I can understand him getting frustrated by people making that kind of comment without necessarily having earned it in his mind. But I also think it's just kind of not exactly that cut and dry. So yeah, that's what was my sort of roundabout way of answering that. It'd be an interesting thing to look at, like maybe a video later on in the future about like true world champions and things like that. So I don't know. It's a good question. Okay, gotta start paying attention here because the way I play this game, if you're not familiar with NCAA 14, it's one of the best sports video games ever made. IMO. But I usually will pick like I'll start as an offensive coordinator because you can like really jack up your coach's stats if you sim a couple of seasons as a coordinator before you become a head coach. So I'll pick like Ohio State or Alabama, like teams that are pretty much guaranteed to either win national championships or be close, and like they base a lot of your rating as a coach off of like how you do, how many points your team scores, things like that. So it's kind of cheating, but that's what my Xbox 360 is currently doing right now, is simming through season 1. I'm Ohio State's offensive coordinator, not because I have any emotional attachment to Ohio State, just to be clear. I'm using them for their status as a good team in the mid part of the 2010s, which they were. They were the first college football playoff champion at the expense of my beloved Alabama Crimson Tide and Blake Sims and Lane Given. Yeah, that was sad. Ezekiel Elliott just kind of ran all over everybody, not just us, but also Oregon in the national title game. So if you can hear that noise, that's my dog. She also she has a spot over here where she likes to sit down. Okay, which sports would you say you follow closely? Your content has a broad range of sports covered. That's a good question. So the one that I follow the most closely, or there's really two. So like baseball and soccer are probably my two ones that I watch the most and like follow the most, partly because I have skin in the game in terms of teams. So like my 3 ride or die teams are Alabama football and basketball. Really any kind of Alabama sports. Because like Alabama softball is in like a super regional or something. I'm like there. But the Braves, obviously, big in there. And also Tottenham. Those are my like three teams that I follow like really, really closely, and the sports that correspond to them the most also. So baseball and soccer would be the two that I have the most like working knowledge of, follow the most closely, listen to like podcasts about, that kind of thing. But I like sort of like sports culture generally. So like if there's an interesting story from a sport that I don't follow all that much, like I'm there, I'm in. That's just, kind of the way my brain works. Because like I think when I started doing the game, like the fast way to grow your channel is not the way that I did it. The smarter way to have like success sooner would have been to pick one sport, a la somebody like Foolish Baseball, who I adore, but I just don't have the focus to stick on one sport all the time. I just think there's so many interesting things happening across the sports landscape that if I just limited myself to just baseball or soccer, I would be missing a lot of really interesting content that I could, follow down rabbit holes. So yeah, sports that I say I follow closely. Definitely baseball and soccer would be the top two probably. Also love the NBA. I love college football. I mean, I'm watching Sunday Night Football right now. So, I mean, I like the NFL as well. And I like different things about them. Like, it's not just, I think I appreciate different things about every sport and like the athletes that populate them. So it's not quite as simple as like, I like this sport and I don't like this sport. There's very few games that I'll watch that I'm like, I don't enjoy this. So yeah, again, kind of a long-winded answer there, but that's the truth. Sorry, my wife just texted me and asked me to mention her. She said they need to know that I'm married, which I am, just to be clear. Don't know if that's relevant, but it's relevant to her. Oh, neat. We just won the Big Ten championship. Normally wouldn't mean that much to me, but in this case, good for my fictional coach. Oh, we have Alabama in the title game. That's unfortunate. That is like kind of the worst part of doing these kind of simulations. You bump up against the teams that you've lived your entire life supporting. That happened in so I made a video a while back about the Rockies, which was kind of a follow-up to Bailey from Foolish Baseball's video about how poorly the Rockies are run. They still stink. I think that video was made in like 2020 or 2021, and the Rockies are still awful. But I've always kind of had a soft spot for them, and again, this is kind of how my brain plays in a situation like this. But I made just like an unstoppable Rockies team, but I had to beat the Braves in the NLCS. It was very sad. Okay, question here. What started your interest in sports psychology? From Timothy L. That is a good question. Kind of a couple things. So my little sister was a big time swimmer. She swam in college. She was really good. She's the actual athlete of the family. But she had a sports psychologist when she was swimming in high school and middle school. And she had a lot of like performance anxiety, and especially like big meets. She would like perform really well in practice. And then when it came time to like do the thing in the actual meets themselves, there would be like a big discrepancy between like her practice times and her times in meets, where, and there's like a bunch of different reasons for that potentially. But as soon as she started seeing this psychologist, I was just like, that's the coolest job ever. That's really neat. Cause I've always like wanted to work in sports and wanted to, like because I'm kind of, I'm way into them. And I think that's like a pretty neat, sort of, if you're going to pick a job, like I wanted it to be headed in that direction somehow. But also sports jobs are really hard to get, and they often don't pay very well, and the hours are terrible. I know a lot of this because my dad was a sports information director, like worked in sports media for a long time, and he's just like gone all the time, and didn't like get nearly the amount of like money or recognition that like the people in his office were like probably deserving for the work they did. I mean, that's just kind of the nature of the business. And so when sports psychology came along as like an option for me, I was like, yeah, this is like, I want to at least try this. And luckily, after I graduated from undergrad, there happened to be a program opening up at West Alabama. I'm sort of the classic millennial example of graduate from undergrad. I had a humanities degree, so my undergrad is in English and Spanish. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't really want to like have like a sales job for the rest of my life, do the things that my degree had made me eligible for. So it just kind of came together, and there was an opportunity and interest, and so I got in that program and loved it immediately. Like I still have a couple of the textbooks, and I use them as resources for my videos relatively regularly. And I just think it's really interesting. Like I think it's just kind of it fuses a lot of my interests in terms of like how the human brain works. Like I mentioned earlier, like I have a neurodivergent brain, so getting the education that I have on like what causes that, and has helped me sort of contextualize a lot of the things that happen in sports on a daily and weekly basis, in games and outside of games. And I feel like it's like made me more empathetic towards athletes in general. I feel like that comes through in a lot of the content that I make. So yeah, a variety of things like kind of got me interested in it, and like I still think it's really cool. So there's no real reason to stop being interested in it. And it's gotten me, that interest has gotten me some success on YouTube, and connected me to you guys. And so yeah, win, 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 win. All right. Stanley asks thoughts on football, parentheses, soccer. Thank you for clarifying. Growing in the U.S. and kind of related thoughts on the impact of Messi joining the MLS. So this may end up being a video topic eventually, because I've been a fan of Messi's for a long time. Like I remember living in Tuscaloosa after I graduated from undergrad and working at the beginning of my master's program. And like I had subscribed to a particular streaming service exclusively so I could watch Messi's Barcelona games. I think it was Fubo, covered a lot of his matches because I think they had a contract with BN at the time. So thoughts on Messi being in the MLS? I was overwhelmingly excited at the beginning of it. I'm always a little wary of sort of how MLS chose to like grow its profile. And I'm thinking more in like the sort of the Bastian Schweinsteiger era, where they really were just like, who's the biggest name that we can get regardless of their like current physical status and what condition they'll be in by the time they actually make it to the league. Because again, pretty much everybody was looking at the David Beckham transfer to LA Galaxy and thinking, okay, well, how would we do that? And it turns out it's not that simple. It really is, still, the same kind of standards as a lot of other transfers are, in terms of like, it's got to be the right fit. It's got to be the right, kind of city and vibe for them to come into. And fortunately for Messi, Miami is perfect for like his current stage of life. I think he's just going to be so incredibly, overwhelmingly popular in that area. I think it's just like, as far as fit goes, it's just like a hand in a glove. That's incredible. I think he made the right choice. Like it was, in terms of, go to Saudi Arabia or, go do something different. I think that was very wise. But yeah, football growing in the U.S. This is a kind of a passion topic for me, just because I've very much ridden this wave, starting back in 2013-14 when NBC got the rights to broadcast the Premier League. Like I made a video about Liverpool and their title chase that year. So I think that's really like when this whole process like started really kicking off. No pun intended. But it's just like, I think there was a misconception for a long time that people in the States don't like soccer, and they do. It was just a question of availability. It was like a big thing. It's just like on major American sports networks, excluding the last 10 years, really, there hasn't been access to like really elite leagues. MLS is not a really elite league, doesn't count, except for like the odd, cup game or some type of exhibition. Like I remember Tottenham playing in, like, I think one of the first Tottenham games I ever watched was Gareth Bale's game where he scored just an absolute banger against West Ham to pretty much just ice the whole thing. So every now and then you get a game like that, or you get like footage of it in Sports Center Top 10 or something like that. But very rarely would you have like a really good sequence of games that you could follow. Because like, to me, that's a lot of what gets people in, is the ability to like consistently follow a team from game to game, week to week. Because that's when you get like hooked into the storylines. You start like, year over year making these connections with the people that are a part of the team, and seeing how they evolve, seeing how like the team evolves as a whole. Like that's where, like, as a fan, that like really deep connection comes from. And if that's not possible because there's the games themselves aren't accessible, that's a problem. So the idea of Serie A, Liga, Bundesliga, Premier League, and La Liga all having like significant contracts with big US broadcasters, or at least broadcasters that are available on most like pretty basic cable packages or YouTube TV or whatever, is kind of wild to me now. But also it's not surprising, like, now that the like really good stuff is available. Like, Americans have always been into that. It's not just a like, if it's good content and good material, and it's like it's something that people can get passionate about. Like if it's soccer or Formula One or golf, whatever, like people are going to buy into it pretty hard. So yeah, and I'm really happy and encouraged to see what the game has looked like and how it's growing in this country, how MLS is growing. I think that's pretty neat. We've got a bunch of new teams and really like promising markets, which I think is really neat, and including Greenville. Go Triumph, baby. But yeah, I love soccer, football, whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to correct you either way. That's kind of a passion project of mine, is changing people's perception of that whole process of like, should we call it soccer? Should we call it football? Because I'm not offended if like an English person calls that game football, because it is football. But yeah, okay. Hockey goal. I've been working with ex-Navy SEAL mental coach since I was 14. Found that the biggest lessons in sports come from improvements outside of the game. Couldn't agree more. So, with your experience, what have you found to be the most notable factors in the success in the sport? I think the biggest one that not enough people pay attention to, and this includes like teams who are like trying to recruit players to their team, is having the right systems in place for them to succeed. Like that includes like mental game, like as obviously like a big part of it. But I think too often, and this kind of keeps me up at night sometimes, guys or girls with a lot of talent go into situations and fail, and people see them as, bad players because of that. When in reality, had they gone to a different environment, had they, been put with a different coach or been put in a different city, had they had, better talent around them, or at least the right talent around them, had they had some type of mentor figure within the team, how close were they to their families, like that kind of thing, that sort of the soft factors of sports are not paid attention to nearly enough. I think that's probably, the most notable factors in like whether an athlete succeeds or fails. And like, again, this keeps me up at night, because think about all of the capital that these teams invest, not only in terms of money, but like if you're recruiting a big free agent, you're spend a lot of time in making that process happen. If you're drafting somebody, you've spent a ton of time paying the people to scout this player, and then going out to meet them, putting them through workouts, like all this stuff. And regardless of what they, how they do in an interview, like if you drop them into a situation where they're not going to succeed, none of that matters. So it's understanding sports and people being put in situations as like a comprehensive process, I think is like the biggest thing. It's just understanding that you have to cater to every part of that person if you want them to do well. And that's more work. That's more investment on behalf of the people actually putting that together. But like, it's going to pay off a lot more if you are actually paying attention to, what that person wants, what that person, gravitates toward in terms of their own interests, what type of stimulus is going to be motivating to them, what type of voices do they have around them that can get through to them, things like that. So, yeah, and interestingly, I did want to talk about you work with an ex-Navy SEAL, because one of the guys that I talked about a long time ago in my Yips episode was Tyler Matzik, who was like, I think he was a first-round pick for the Rockies, and he, I think he also worked with an ex-Navy SEAL, and that kind of like brought him back to a point where he could pitch at an elite competitive level, to the point that, he was pitching for the Braves in the 2021 playoffs, and he was basically unhittable. Like, it's one of my favorite sequences as a sports fan ever was watching Tyler Matzik. I think it was in Game 6 against the Dodgers in the NLCS, just like pick up the ball against the heart of their order. This is the Dodgers. This is probably the best team in baseball at that point, and just like absolutely not phased at all. Somebody who had like significant issues picking up a baseball and throwing it to another person successfully years before that, and all of a sudden, like, he's striking out Albert Pujols and Mookie Betts like they're not even there. Like, that was really neat. And yeah, all because, I don't want to say all because a lot of this was on him too, but a significant portion of that was because he had worked with a guy who I'm pretty sure was a Navy SEAL, but if not, he was definitely ex-military of some sort. I will look that up and get back to you. But yeah, that's, again, kind of a long-winded answer, but that's what I think. Okay. Cowboys up 6-0 on the Giants. I saw they had like a field goal blocked or something. Like, because I saw a guy, it was maybe a punt return. I don't know. I just saw a Cowboys player running very fast in the other direction, which is how they got their touchdown. Do you think Team USA could have won FIFA basketball? So, do you mean FIBA? Because like they just had the World Cup. I didn't really pay attention to this, and it was on me. So let me look up our roster. USA FIBA World Cup roster. Okay, because I saw like Tyrese Halliburton being on our national team. I love Tyrese Halliburton. I think he's great. But in terms of us like having a dominant roster, that's not exactly where you want to be. But yeah, I mean, we could have. I think the issue that we're going to run into in the next 10 to 15 years is a lot of countries catching up to us. which is kind of our own fault. The irony of having a really popular league, with players like LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan being like these enormous global ambassadors is, the kids that grew up watching them in Serbia and Germany and Italy and Slovenia are now like maturing into adulthood. And there's just going to be more of them as like global access to the NBA increases, which I think is an overwhelmingly good thing. I think globalization of sport is awesome. I think us having a greater shared language with people outside of our country is really productive and healthy in terms of us as like not only a sports culture, but like as a wider culture. But also, I know a lot of people get uncomfy when our teams don't just like go out and kick ass and take names. So, especially in basketball, like that's supposed to be like one of our sports where like, we've traditionally had the best team, no matter who we throw out there, with a couple of notable exceptions. But yeah, no, I get that. Could we have won? Yeah, we probably should have won anyway. Like we should go into every tournament as favorites pretty much. But people are catching up. And like, that's just kind of the way of things. I'm going to look at this. Because like the last couple of NBA MVPs have not been from this country. Yeah, okay. So we got, it really should have been Jokic the last 3 years, but to find the last American MVP of the NBA, you have to go back to 2018. And so that's James Harden in 2018. Yeah. So again, the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you've had a Greek guy, a Serbian guy, and then a Cameroonian guy winning the NBA MVP. And so not just at the top of the league, but also at sort of like the mid ranks, there's going to be more people from international teams that are filling out those rosters. But yeah, that's kind of where it's headed. And again, I think that's a good thing. A lot of people are going to disagree, but it's just, hopefully we adjust and can sort of fortify the way that we're developing players. But yeah, okay. What are your thoughts on athletes who are able to perform in big game situations but are unable to focus on the mundane day-to-day details at the same level? Which is harder to learn? Okay, this is a great question. I've told you guys before, I'm a big Alabama football fan, and we just had a very painful loss against Texas. But they put out an interesting stat. Texas's quarterback Quinn Ewers has some like ridiculously low completion percentage on a certain type of throw against everybody else, but against Alabama and Oklahoma over the last 2 seasons that he's been involved, that percentage is significantly higher, with the suggestion being that because he's like more locked in because it's a big game, all of a sudden he's just like dropping dimes against the best teams he's playing against. And that's the thing, people do that. In terms of like people who are able to do that consistently, I made a video a while back about Tom Brady. Some people are just wired for that. I mean, a lot of it has to do with like the way that you process certain neurotransmitters, specifically dopamine, also norepinephrine, which is adrenaline, how well your brain deals with sort of the pressure of significant situations, because depending on whether it gets overwhelmed easily by that and sort of like throws off all of your entire nervous system, trying to like deal with that sort of like flood of nerves and sort of like that feeling of excitement, good or bad, can determine whether or not like you actually perform to your level. But to answer your second question, not every situation is going to give you that same surge of like, neurotransmitter. Like it's not going to give you that same level of excitement. So if you need that to perform well, if your brain needs that to balance, because again, everybody has neurological differences, like people process stimuli in different ways depending on the structure of their brains. So there are people absolutely like that who are just sort of like that big game athlete because they need that stage. They need the bright lights. They need the stakes. They need, and that's chemical. That's not just like, sort of colloquial. That's not made up. Like that's a real thing. Like somebody can have a real like sensitivity to either direction, that type of level of stimulus. Okay, what's your familiarity on rugby and cricket? Poor. Those are not super popular sports in the U.S. Again, big fan of their sort of like American avatars, which would be baseball and American football. But again, this is one of those things where like accessibility is an issue. Like we don't get a ton of like really high level. I had a lot of people comment on my video about Ange Postecoglou about like how I didn't mention rugby league. And it's not because I don't know that Australian people are like rugby. I do. It was just, again, that's not a language that I speak very well because that's not like a big sport in the US. Like we definitely do play it, but it's just not like a sort of like tier 1 or even tier 2 game for us. And I would say cricket's the same thing. But if like Netflix came out with a documentary about rugby league or about like Cricket World Cup or the Ashes or whatever, I think people would dig it. Like I think people would like hop on board because that's just kind of they need a gateway. They need some sort of connection to the sport itself. Especially Americans, we like that kind of thing to be able to buy into it. World Cup ongoing or upcoming would be a great time to look into both. I may, that may be something I dig into because like prior to Tour de France video, I did not know a ton about cycling. I didn't know a lot about sort of the vibe of that entire sport. I didn't know a lot of the vocabulary. I didn't know sort of the machinations of how it works on race day. But going through the whole like month-long tour, pre-tour, post-tour event like that did a lot in terms of me learning that stuff to the point that like the Vuelta a España, I gotta like lean into my background here, is happening right now. And is Sepp Kuss still leading it? I think he is. Let me look. Vuelta a España leaderboard. Because the last time, okay. So Sepp is in first, and then Primož Roglič, and then Jonas Vingegaard. All top three, all Jumbo-Visma riders, 1, 2, 3. So again, I think this is possible. I think I could definitely get into rugby and cricket. The issue is that in terms of like following something, kind of following up on a conversation that we were having earlier, the issue becomes like in terms of following it regularly is there's just so much space up here to be able to like keep up with things on a daily and weekly basis. But yeah. Okay. Concerning different neurotransmitters, this is from Remy. Considering different neurotransmitters, would you argue that trying to limit chemical imbalances would be best for performance, thereby making performance more like a habit loop? I don't know the answer to that, to be totally honest. Because when we talk about like a habit loop, I'm thinking you're meaning like reinforcement, and then we're getting into like behaviorism, which is good in some senses. Let's see. I'm gonna get this a little closer. Would you argue that trying to limit chemical imbalances would be best for performance? Maybe, but also that's kind of like a big part of what makes athletes individuals. And people individuals. So like when we say imbalances, like some imbalances are healthier and more manageable and more, what's the word? There's a word for this that I'm just completely blanking on. But some of them are going to be more beneficial than others, right? So if you are somebody who has like a big serotonin deficit in your brain, that's not good. Right, so that's somebody who is probably going to have a lot of issues with mood regulation. They're going to probably be depressed to a certain degree, or just not having a great time. So, in terms of like you want to be regulated, like you want to be in a position where you can like focus on your sport. But yeah, so and also when we talk about getting into like a habit loop. This is why practice is important. You're trying to get to the point where this is why you do that. Where you get that like muscle memory, it literally is muscle memory. Like you want to get to the point where your brain is not putting out any more energy or effort than it absolutely needs to be able to perform an activity, because then it can focus on other stuff, right? So if you are a person who, let's say you are a really gifted young soccer player and you get out into a really important match, but like because you are not super familiar with that situation, instead of just like going through your regular flow, instead of just focusing on the things you would normally, your brain is distracted by all of the different stimuli going on around it. This is the first time you've ever played in front of 60,000 people. So like processing that through and getting that sort of filtered out is going to take a lot of energy. And if your brain is having to use energy for that, it's not going to be able to pay attention to, how heavy is this pass coming towards me right now. Normally, if you're on a practice field, that sort of stuff happens naturally. It happens almost like second nature because you've done it so many times. But all of a sudden you introduce this entirely new stimulus, like it's going to have an effect on most people. Some people are, aliens can just get in there and be totally fine. Because again, that has to do with like how their brain processes that different type of stimulus. But I think there is a sweet spot between like letting people's brains sort of express themselves in that way. Because again, this is a big part of what makes people who they are, and getting to a point where you can do things through second nature. Okay. So, I think they're the best athletes know when to be able to, again, just kind of lean back on their experience and when to really like engage with what's going on around them. If that makes any sense. We talked about that a little bit with the Tour de France, and like, if somebody is experiencing pain in the middle of, an event or a stage, in that case, a game, whatever, whether you associate or dissociate from it, because there are benefits and drawbacks to both. So, I think this is a similar conversation to that of like, do you want to be like overly focused on what your body is doing? Do you want to be like completely locked in? Because that's when something like the zone happens, which I talked about with Clyde Brolin a few weeks ago. The zone is basically being able to filter everything out and just have this, sort of pure reactive response to everything going on around you. So, but that's also rare. That doesn't happen to most people very often. So, in terms of like sort of the gold standard sports psychology wise, the zone is sort of this like, holy grail of what you're trying to build people up to. And, hopefully they have an experience like that in their career. But a lot of that does happen because of being able to, not focus on everything they're doing and, having that practice base to be able to lean back on. I don't know if you can hear, but my dog is adjusting her sleeping spot. Okay, what are your thoughts on the quote? The training should be great. Okay, one through training should be great. One should be mundane. One should be awful. I think this equates to natural neurological cycles like dopamine high. I mean, it could. Also, it's just like periodization. Again, I'm not an exercise physiologist, so this is not necessarily a great place for me to express this, or like a topic that I'm super comfortable weighing in on. But I will say that in terms of your mind, like it's not wise to just like, the quickest way to burn out is to just like, go for max intensity all the time. And that seems pretty straightforward, but like it's true. A lot of people want to, camp out in that 80+% kind of range, which isn't good for your body. It's also not good for your brain. So I don't know in terms of like the exact percentage, but I mean, it sounds okay to me. Like I think it's worth giving a try, because you do have neurological cycles, like you mentioned. You have your body produces things at a different rate. Because again, like if you think about like what you go through during a given day, Like, you're going to be most awake at certain times. You're going to be get sleep pressure at certain times. All of that is regulated by your neurotransmitters and hormones, like when those things are happening, when you're feeling certain ways. And those things do exist in cycles. So that's why we have this, like, wake for this long, sleep for this long, fed for this long, and then I get into like this point on the starve feed cycle, and then my brain is getting a signal from my stomach like, hey, we need to eat. Like, all of that is coming on a cycle. So yeah, I could see that sort of like mimicking that rhythm. But again, not an exercise physiologist, not a pro in terms of telling people how to structure their training. But yeah, those are my unfiltered, slightly uneducated thoughts. Tyler Meredith asks, did I miss anything? You missed me correctly pronouncing Tadej Pogacar's name, which, is a big win for me, especially on the internet. That's like one of the biggest criticisms I get on every video, which hurts me. What are your thoughts on using sports psychology principles and practices in day-to-day life, and also things like learning and working on projects? So one thing that I hope I can get across in the stuff that I make is that these things are about sports, but it's not really about sports. It's one of my favorite things about this whole field of study is this is stuff that I integrate into my life all the time. And so one of the most, and there's the reason I wanted to make a video on him in the first place. One of the things that I find the most endearing about Ange Postecoglou is his ability to balance humility with confidence. This is something that I see in him, just his confidence that he can get the job done, that his methods work, that he has the acumen, and regardless of what's going on around him, regardless of any bumps in the road, that his system is going to work, and the choices that he's making eventually are going to create something that he wants to create. That's confidence, and that's regardless of any sort of like I said, speed bumps along the way, detours towards where they're going. He's going into it this is going to happen, this is going to work. But he's also humble because he's had this background where he's been second guessed and underestimated for a pretty significant portion of his career. And that's just that humility, that sort of not being pretentious, not assuming that things are going to be a certain way just because you are this certain type of person. I think that is not only refreshing and endearing, but also makes him better at his job, because he's more relatable to his players. He's better with the media. This is all things that funnel back into him being good at what he does. And for me, I look at that and I'm how can I emulate that in my job? How can I, because I work with students all the time. How do I, convince my kids that I know what I'm doing, and I'm confident in this material. I, believe in the way I've structured the class. I believe that our student-teacher relationship is going to make not only them better, but me better. But then also not come across as a know-it-all jerk. How do I maintain that humility through the duration of that relationship? Which again comes from, to me, comes from observing people like Ange, and a lot of those things sort of carry across different videos that I work on. Even the things I made the Tiger Woods video about all of his various indiscretions in the past. And so the big takeaway for me was even if I completely screw up at one particular part, even if it takes a long time, there's a path back to being who I was before, and maybe even better than I was before. Did I watch the Manziel documentary? Would love to get my thoughts. I have not watched it yet. I think that so I would say the same thing about the Florida one as well. I think it's going to make me sad. And I think that would have to be something where I sat down and was okay, I'm watching this, and I'm going to in the same way that, you read certain books and you just expect to like fly through them, but some of them you're going to have to chew on. So I think even if it it just probably is quite entertaining and written well and well produced, all that kind of stuff. Like I would be watching it very much thinking about it like, okay, I'm going to have to chew on this. And some of it's probably not going to like be all that appetizing or go down that well, because like his story is pretty tragic. He just like had all the talent in the world and kind of pissed it away by being an immature idiot. But obviously there were some external factors that did not help that situation. Going back to what I said earlier about, again, people being put in the right situations is extremely important. Environmental factors are huge in terms of, is somebody actually going to be able to maximize their potential? This isn't anything. Like this is not just sports related, but especially in sports where you have this like team goal, but so much of like individual performance is sort of brought out through that individual person's environment, and their support system, their belief in themselves, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm definitely going to watch it. May make a video about it in response to it. I know we're in college football season, so there will be a college football video relatively soon. I just don't know exactly what it's going to be about. I was thinking about doing one about Reggie Bush, but Secret Base just like a week ago just made one about him versus the NCAA. So probably going to hold off on that. But yeah. All right. So what are your thoughts on the balance of aiming high, but also needing to focus on the day-to-day in order to reach the end goal? Can hoping for the perfect path to success be demoralizing? Okay. So this is tough. I am a huge fan of coaches who understand that the process is more important than the outcome. And this is, again, it's not just true in sports, but it's true all over the place. And, I made a video about Nick Saban a while back, and this is kind of his thing. But I find that the healthiest cultures embrace that attitude. Like it's not just, you didn't hit your, quarterly goals for sales in this, particular area. So like, we're going to, dock you X number of, dollars from your bonus, things like that. Like I'm not a huge fan of like looking at things that cut and dry or that punitively. I'm a huge fan of like, assessing all of the different environmental factors that might have led to that. So again, this is another thing, bring it back to somebody like Ange Postecoglou, who I like just admire so much as a coach and leader. His whole thing about like the teams that he coaches is even if things aren't going well, if the players are doing things the way that he wants them to do them, he will back them. He will stand up for them in like press conferences. Very famous example, when he was coach of Australia. I think I mentioned this in the video. Like his goalkeeper came out playing risky, because that's kind of the way that Postecoglou's system works. He comes out, hangs out by the halfway line, and he got chipped. Like somebody from Greece, ironically in this case, because that's where Postecoglou is from, just absolutely ripped one from about the halfway line right over this keeper's head. And everybody after the game is asking Postecoglou like what was going on, what was he doing there? And Postecoglou just told them like he was there because I told him to be there. Like he was doing exactly what I wanted him to do. It wasn't, that's not his fault. That's the other players around him for, not closing that guy down. Not, it's their fault for giving the ball away. Like I love that sort of like commitment to a collective culture. Like I think that is huge when we're talking about sports teams, but also just like work teams. Like this is people that are conscious of the needs and desires and strengths and weaknesses of the people around them is just going to like foster a completely different kind of culture. And I think that's really neat and underrated in terms of like the way to build your organization. So as to your last question, focusing on the day or reach the goal can help you for path to success be demoralizing. Yes, committing to something like, I want to be the best golfer in the world is really, really hard. That's mentally unbelievably draining and isolating. Just that like sacrifice. And people that talk about sacrifice, we're not just talking about like, not eating dessert. Like this is sacrifice in the sense of I am not able to say no in the same way that most people are. Right. So I'm not able to be flexible in the same way that most people are. It's that mental commitment and devotion that separates, elite athletes from even like really talented normal and amateur level athletes. So it can absolutely be demoralizing. Some people are not built for that. And so a lot of people get to that level, and even if they have elite levels of talent and athleticism, like that's just not sustainable over, a number of different years as things progress. So, yeah. All right. So we're getting over an hour here. So I'll take a couple more and then I'll peace out. But yeah, Tyler asks, what are some of the coolest things you've learned about in making all these videos? You've done so much digging into so many different subjects. It's hard to pick in terms of like just a few because like every video has its own like neat little nugget to pick up on. I really like remembering things that I had forgotten. So like picking up on little nuggets historically about like, oh yeah, this person. So like when I was making the Nikola Jokic video, because I didn't know, like learning that his brother like lived with Darko Milicic and like they knew each other. And, maybe it's a stretch to say that like knowing how Darko's career turned out influenced Nikola. I don't know. The guy that wrote the article in Sports Illustrated that I read and used as a reference definitely seemed to think so. But yeah, stuff like that I didn't realize had happened or had forgotten. Like all that kind of stuff. There's sort of buried in a lot of the research that I do is things that come up that just kind of like bring me a little bit of joy along the way. So that stuff is really cool to me anyway, because I'm a nerd about that sort of thing. But then also just like getting into the hard science of it. I'm not naturally like a super hard science kind of guy, but again, I can speak the language enough to know what's going on. So like when I see things about statistics or things about, actual physical neuroscience in a paper that somebody's written, like I think that stuff's really cool because I also find that people enjoy that kind of content. Okay. Yeah. Last one here. Can you explain your video making process? No. I'm pretty interested in learning about how you do research. Okay. So there's a few phases. So I start with a general information collection phase. This is generally done through things like watching YouTube videos, listening to podcasts, things of that nature. And from there, I connect that to sort of like more brass tacks kind of stuff. And so from there, I'm connecting like YouTube videos, podcasts to articles. And then from there, I start kind of forming, okay, this is where I think I want to take this story. And then I'll start writing a script. And then that usually takes a weekish. The scripting is like the most important part to me, IMO, because I'm a writer at heart, and that's like something that I enjoy and something I think I'm good at. So I want to do that well, because again, I'm like an okay video editor, but I have confidence in my ability to like write and tell a story. So that takes a while. I put a lot of effort into that. And then from there, it's the editing part of like the actual like thing that you guys see takes a while, and it also is pretty tedious. But I'm going through YouTube. I'm trying to pick up B-roll, which is what goes behind my voiceover. At some point, I will record that voiceover in my closet, because that's my recording studio. Have to work to make sure that no pets try and come in while that's happening. And then once that's done, upload it to YouTube. Make sure there aren't any copyright snafus and then turn it loose. And hopefully the algorithm blesses me and as many people as possible tune in. Well, yeah, that's kind of it. Starts with research, starts with taking the writing process seriously, seeing if anybody else has done videos on it and kind of like what the tone of those videos were, if there were any like interesting nuggets that I can pull from that. So like been working on one sort of a longer term vision about the Cubs winning the 2016 World Series, and I was listening to a podcast about it, and they mentioned their NLDS series with the Giants. And how the Giants had won 10 consecutive NLDS, or not NLDS games, but 10 consecutive elimination games going into that series. And that's just the kind of thing that I'm like, oh, okay. So that's like a concrete number that people can latch on to understand the significance of, because I did. And, if I'm doing that, then conceivably somebody else will too. So that to me is like an important part of it too. It's just like maintaining that curiosity and, genuine interest in what's going on and sort of like understanding the landscape of whatever sport I'm talking about. Okay. And so that is, we're like an hour and 10 minutes in here. And so I'm going to go ahead and cut it off there. If you have any more questions, feel free to put them on our community page, because I do check that pretty much every day. You can tweet me. My Twitter handle is @Will_Shingleton, so just my name. Or you can comment on any one of the many videos I have made. So, yeah, thank you guys for coming. I'm glad I got to spend some time with you. We'll do this again soon. We have something else to celebrate, but for now, that's all I got. Peace.